Hey folks, it's Fernando doing another video for the Modern Survivalist, and today I'm going to be doing a video about some of the lessons learned of the economic collapse in Venezuela. It actually started several years ago, of course, with Hugo Chavez, and it's been a long road, but definitely downhill. And as of right now, the situation is certainly unbearable. I mean, people are just starving on the streets of Venezuela. So I found this article. This is from Mail One. The information isn't that great, but especially the pictures I liked because they illustrate very well some important points. So let's get to it. Let's start with the title over here. It says, "Exclusive, why shouldn't we enjoy ourselves just because the country is burning? Super rich socialists quaff champagne in Venezuela country club while middle-class mothers scavenge for scraps in the gutter. And even the dogs are starving." Right, that's the introduction. A couple of things here already that I'd like to point out. First of all, the idea of middle class Venezuela, there's really not much left of a middle class to begin with. All right, there's this the thing that happens in a place like Venezuela when it collapses is that most of the middle class actually becomes poor. There's very true middle class left, and you'll see in a second what I mean by that. What's called middle class in Venezuela is just plain old poor by anyone's standard. What happens when a country goes down like that, and I saw that in Argentina as well, is that maybe 95% of what used to be middle class ends up being poor, and maybe 5% or maybe on the upper middle class survives and stays that way, but usually it's most of the middle class becoming poor. Then about super rich socialists, I don't know about that in terms of just calling everyone that is rich in Venezuela socialist, and actually the article in itself contradicts this headline when it talks about the rich people actually being diplomats and CEOs of companies and that sort of thing. And besides super rich socialists, it's kind of a contradiction on its own. And socialism is like one of those key words used a lot by the media today. The thing is that you can be rich, especially in a place like Venezuela. If you're very rich in Venezuela, you are in one way or another linked and associated or in some form of agreement with the current dictatorship. There's really not much of a way around that. Now, there's nothing wrong with being rich. I mean, you can be extremely wealthy and you can have achieved such getting to that point. You can get to being very rich by very honorable means. If you are an honorable person that works hard, makes money, right? Yeah, you can get to be very rich and be a very good, honest person. Now, you're going to be somewhat of a capitalist to some degree, because if not, you are not going to be rich. It's a contradiction on its own. But let's get to that here. So this is what they show as the country club in Venezuela, what it's like, and it's a pretty nice pool here, and it gets like the clubhouse and such. I mean, there's really nothing that here in Spain you find this and much better all over the place, and it's not considered anything too exclusive. Many places are just like that or better, but I suppose that for Venezuela, where people are really starving to death, this would be very luxurious. And yeah, they spend their days playing golf and such, while the rest of the country is in a pretty disastrous situation. And yeah, they have their butlers or waitresses or whatnot with candies and chocolates, and then you have, this would be like the middle class people in Venezuela. The middle class folks are the ones making $10 a week and barely surviving, and as you see here, the shelves are empty. Now, another thing I'd like to point out, how ridiculous it is that a country like Venezuela, which is pretty large, it's a pretty big country. You're not talking about a little island that has no means of production. They're talking about a big country, big enough country for sure, with a wonderful, perfect climate for growing absolutely everything that you could possibly want. So you have land where everything just grows like crazy with a tropical climate, and then you have a lot of oil as well. It makes no sense whatsoever that Venezuela is going through this kind of situation. And this is purely, exclusively a political mistake. And it's a political mistake by these same people that are now suffering it. Okay, this is probably what used to be middle class in Venezuela. This woman here picking up the garbage and eating out of the trash on the sidewalk, right? Even dogs are starving as well. Yeah, regarding dogs, this is something that I saw in Argentina as well. Back in the day when things went down, a lot of people started turning their pets loose. They just dumped them on the streets. And my neighborhood was maybe a little bit of an upper middle class, so maybe it wasn't as bad. But in the surrounding communities and neighborhoods, lots of folks that had fancy pure breed dogs, they ended up turning them loose, and many of these, especially the medium or larger ones, would gather in packs and just go through garbage and even attack people in a very National Geographic type of dog pack, going back to their basic instincts and acting like wolves. And people got attacked, and some people even got killed by that. So it was an issue. So yeah, a lot of these guys just end up eating out of the garbage, while at the same time, these folks have their lives in their country clubs and whatnot. Membership costing £77,000, made like $80,000-$90,000, and they have their kids, their families. Are these all evil, bad people, as the article headline sort of suggests at a point? I don't think so. I mean, many of these are probably not evil people or not bad people at all. They have their families, their wives, their children, and such. Yes, it is true that anyone in Venezuela making money, and it's the same thing in Argentina, in these corrupt countries, that's the key word, guys. And here's maybe one of the most important lessons that I want to transmit with the video. It's not about being socialist, it's not about being capitalist. What you cannot be, what you cannot have as a head of state in your country is someone that is corrupt, all right? And that's something that I learned in Argentina. I mean, during the 90s, we had this guy here as president of Argentina. This is Carlos Saúl Menem. He was president during most of the 90s, and he was, capitalist. Yeah, I suppose. Well, not in the old school type of capitalism, but he was definitely a right-wing, conservative, very business-friendly kind of guy. But he was extremely corrupt, and he destroyed the country. And after that, we had this same. Both of these are from the Peronist movement. Menem was Peronist, so was Cristina and Néstor Kirchner. The exact same thing, but that the thing in common was this guy was from the right. These Néstor Kirchner were both right, but they had a left-leaning agenda in their speech, even though they were pretty much bankers themselves. But they had that populist, nationalist bullshit speech that is fairly popular. And the thing that they both had in common was corruption. That's the thing that you should never go for, okay? You never vote for corruption. You never go for the lesser of two evils. Back in 2001, we had the option of choosing this guy again. He was going again for the presidency after having 2 terms. He wanted to come back. And we had this guy. We had Néstor Kirchner to choose from. And a lot of people chose the lesser evil. The lesser evil back in the day was this guy. People didn't even know his name. In the media, in the 8 o'clock news, they didn't know the name of this guy who was running for president. But since we knew the other guy was bad, we went for this one. But I didn't vote for this guy. All right? I can at least say I didn't vote for him, even though the entire country is responsible in the same way that people of Venezuela are responsible for the disaster that they have to live with right now. The people in Argentina are responsible for the disaster they're still trying to fix, because most of them voted for this guy. You know what? Don't vote for a lesser of two evils, because sometimes the one that you think is a lesser of two evils is actually worse than the one you already knew. Okay? Keep that in mind. Don't. If there's no one to vote, empty vote. Just that's what I did. For over a decade, I didn't vote because I wouldn't be voting for this bastard right here. And I sure wasn't going to be voting for Menem. No way. Right? And I didn't have any candidate. Don't fall for that trap of you have to choose between this corrupt politician or this other corrupt politician. If both of them are corrupt and those are the only options you have, you don't vote for anyone. You just vote a blank vote, and that's it, as a form of protest. And these guys in Venezuela, they probably thought they were doing things right. They probably thought that the Chavez revolution bullshit was the right thing to do, and they supported it. And this is how they ended up, empty shelves. And these folks have to wait in line. I mean, Venezuela for some time, they didn't even have toilet paper. I'm sure it's still a problem today. Basically, they lack absolutely everything. They basically destroyed the national industry by overtaking it with corruption, with mandatory prices that made no sense and were unsustainable. They destroyed the national industry, and they were living out of the oil that they got, importing pretty much everything. So all these guys here, they're all responsible. Chavez was voted into power. So these guys are responsible for the hell they created themselves. Now, don't get me wrong. Many of these are fighting what they always knew. Maybe they realized later. Maybe they're just realizing it now, and they're fighting it. But they, some of them may even be dying fighting the regime that they have to live under right now. Notice something else. Most of these guys are pretty skinny as well. They're very thin. Okay, they're pretty slim, but many, and you'll see in some of the other pictures, they are actually kind of skinny as well. And this is interesting because in general, especially in developed countries or in somewhat developed countries, you have a thing that goes on that poor people tend to be fatter than richer people. And you see this, very well in the United States. In the United States, poor people are usually overweight. They're fatter than rich people. Now that's because they're poor enough so that they cannot afford the healthier lifestyle and the healthier food, right? And they mostly rely on junk food and such. But they're not poor to a level where they're lacking enough calories. So there's America poor and there's Venezuela poor. When you're Venezuela poor, you're lacking the minimum calories so as to maintain your weight. So that's what happens to a significant number of people. Look at this, quite a bit. Some of these, as I was saying, you still have some people that are a bit heavier, but in general, they are quite skinny. And you end up with these situations where you have a supermarket guarded by a guy with an M16, waiting in line for 8-9 hours to buy basic staples, a bag of rice or pasta or something like that. They form lines. I mean, they managed to create such a chaos. Look, something else here. The ID. You see that? This woman has her ID because she has to show it, and they were even using like tattoos or marks in their hands and fingerprints as means of identification, because they have a limited amount of food that they can actually purchase in the supermarkets. That's at least with the official ones. There's a huge black market, but this is what happens to most of these people. They're just eating out of the garbage, just going through the garbage. Look how disastrous this place is. I mean, it's deplorable. Look at the conditions, the streets here. Nothing really works in Venezuela. Venezuela is, worst inflation in the planet. Argentina was actually for a long time in number 2 in that ranking. But it's also Caracas is the murder capital of the world as well. So it's a disaster, and people, are still, charitable in their own way. And this is also important. I think that essentially people are good. And basically, most people are good people. That the thing is that sometimes they make bad decisions, like voting for the regime that they cannot get rid of right now. That was a bad decision. I don't think that these were all evil people that voted for Chavez. They just didn't know any better. right? Are they responsible? Are they the only ones to blame for what happened to them? Absolutely, no doubt about that at all. Look at this guy, how thin his arms are. I have this right there. Yeah, that's okay. Yeah, it's a pretty awful situation, and the thing with the dogs as well, animals of course suffer that as well. Now, you may be wondering what happened. This is the example of the black market thing. Lots of products are being imported, by what they call like mules or bachaqueros, which is like people carrying stuff back and forth from the borders from nearby countries, or if they know someone in a supermarket, they buy from the official supermarket at the official ridiculously low prices, right? Which were kept for a very long time thanks to the money that they got through oil, right? So they buy from those supermarkets and they sell at 3 times as much price. They sell for 3 times as much in the black market. So basically, yeah, that's the other lesson. If you have money in such a place, you survive. There's rich people. You have to respect those that have managed to find a way of making the system work for them. If you've been living in Venezuela for some time and you didn't leave because you're rich, you're wealthy, like these guys. Like these guys here being wealthy, and why would they be living in Venezuela? Well, probably because they're benefiting from it. Probably they have arrangements and they have something worked out with the current regime, and they're milking it. They're making a lot of money out of it. If you had any brains and you had a way of leaving, you probably would have left before, unless you're making a ton of money in Venezuela that you cannot make elsewhere. And at the same time, again, respect for people with money. Even corrupt people that are just found a way to make this work for them, they will be the first ones out of the country if they feel that they are at risk. If they feel that the threat has reached levels that it's just too risky for them, they will be jumping on a jet and leaving this place within a matter of hours. At least the smart ones will. Anyone that with half a brain should have left Venezuela a very long time ago. It's unsustainable, this place. So we were talking about the black market thing, and here's how much bolivares you need. These are 60 pounds. 60 pounds, like $70, like 70 or $80, give or take. $80 is this ridiculous stack of bolivares. It got to a point right now with the bolivar, with the Bolivian, the Venezuelan currency, that they cannot print it anymore because it's more expensive to actually print these than what they are actually worth. Okay, they reached a point where it's more expensive. They had to stop printing money because they cannot afford to print it anymore. And of course, if you are poor and you are sick, you are screwed in Venezuela. It says here in the article that they cannot afford, hospitals cannot afford toilet paper, let alone supplies, and let alone actual medicine. So yeah, I suppose that if you're some of the richer ones, like we were seeing before, you find ways, or you have maybe a rich people hospital in somewhere in Caracas. Now, you may be wondering, what about people in the country? Because we see all the time in the survival forums and such, like, you need a piece of land and you need to grow your own food, and that's the key to survival. Well, no, I've said it 1,000 times, never get sold, but no. I mean, it's great if you grow your own food and such, but it's not a solution to this kind of mess. It's not a solution in Venezuela, it wasn't a solution in Argentina, it's definitely not a solution in Africa or in Ukraine or anywhere where shit hits the fan bad, like it happens in these places. You don't fix this something this serious just by having a piece of land and growing food. This guy here is actually a farmer, and he has 7 kids and a wife, and they're all working. These are all hard-working people. This guy is Carlos de Parra, 39 years old, and his wife Shoraima, 34-year-old. This is all they have to feed the family for the day. A ball of corn flour dough. That's all they have. And this guy has a plot of land, and he's growing his his food, you know, but it's just not enough. And what the article says, I think it's quite, and this is the only thing else he has, a bag of salt. Okay. And it says, outside Caracas, that's the capital, outside Caracas, the shortages were even more acute. All right, it's even worse outside of that crappy city where there's nothing and people are starving. It's even worse out of it. At the Excelsior Gama supermarket northeast of the capital, thousands of people jolted and argued in an unruly queue while men armed with machine guns try to keep peace. Okay. Here has local resident Carlo de Parra and his wife have 7 children between the age of 6 and 17. He works as a cleaner and his wife sells street food, but between them they earn just £2 of like $4 or $3 or $4 a week due to spiraling inflation. Living without electricity and running water, the family has so little to eat that they are starving. They're starting to starve. In the kitchen cupboard there was nothing but a bag of salt. In the fridge was just a few moldy limes and a fist-sized lump of dough in a pot. Lunch for all 7 kids, the ball that we saw before. And listen to this. I grow corn, beans, and yam, but it's not enough for us. And a worm is eating the crops. Okay? And this guy, this farmer says, I have no money for pesticides or fertilizers. Think about this for a second. Okay? The guy is growing his he's working his garden, but there's no supplies for working this. You guys in the United States think, well, I just go to the nearest Walmart and buy whatever I need. But keep in mind, we're talking about a place that they cannot stock dry pasta, flour, or rice in the freaking shelves. How much do you think you're going to be finding pesticides for whatever is eating your crops, or fertilizers that you may need, or seeds, or any of the other supplies that you need for actual farming? All right. Now, let's even suppose that by some miracle you manage to do without the pesticides that are eating this guy's, his crops. Let's suppose that you somehow find a way to make it work in spite of all that. You know what's going to be happening? The government, may that be Chavez or now Maduro, whoever that is, he's going to be watching that and he's going to be saying, you know what? We'll take it from you. We'll take it away from you, because as long as there's a road leading to wherever it is that you are, someone will know what you're doing. Someone will realize that you're growing stuff and you're doing well, and they'll steal it from you. Because that's, again, the main problem with these governments, with these, authoritarian regimes, is that they are corrupt. That's in essence the problem. You cannot stay away from that by just growing stuff in your farm. It just doesn't work that way. And here, this is actually quite interesting, where it's being explained what's the problem. So, if you're wondering, why is it that, given how fertile the land is and the climate is fantastic for growing crops, why are people starving in Venezuela? And here is the answer. So if Venezuela's small farmers are cultivating crops, why has Venezuelan food production stagnated and actually declined in per capita terms? And here it is. To answer that question, you would need to speak to farmers who are not rich, but who have slightly more land, and whom Venezuela used to rely to grow food for the market. Eligio Lucena rents a few hectares of land and employs up to 12 people to cultivate potatoes. He says the government tight controls on imports have made it impossible to get hold of seeds and fertilizer. Again, the same problem. It's crippling us. Many people around here have the land all prepared for sowing, but we cannot get hold of the seeds. His father Jose used to herd sheep, goats, and pigs, but they say that the government's price controls destroyed his business. So you have your homestead, right? The survival is with his homestead. You're growing stuff, and you go to sell it to a market, and suddenly a cop shows up, or a truck full of military personnel shows up and tells you, you know what? You're selling at the wrong price. We're going to be taking away your stuff. And what are you going to be doing? Fighting everyone, fighting the government in every corner? Chavez sold meat so cheaply he was practically giving it away, and no one round here would buy my pork anymore. They destroyed the national industry. They destroyed the farmers. Many basic foodstuffs such as maize, flour, rice, beans, milk, and eggs are in such short supply that they are now rationed by the state. The government blames the shortages on the economic war by big landowners and food companies, which it says are refusing to produce and distribute food in order to undermine the left-wing government. It gets to a point, I mean, Chavez and Maduro, these guys don't understand that you cannot just tell a producer, sell, your pig for $1 or whatever. If it doesn't work, if it's unviable financially speaking, it's just impossible for him to do so. He will just close his business and do something else, because you cannot just force reality with orders. But this charge is rejected by Carlos, the president of the Venezuelan Federation of Cattle Ranchers. If we had wanted to destabilize the government, they wouldn't have been in power for the last 17 years, would they? The real problem, he says, is that while the world oil price, and this is interesting, guys, oil prices were high, the government relied on food imports which were sold at such low prices that it was impossible for Venezuelan farmers to compete. Because they had oil, they could afford to subsidize the imports of food in such a way that it was sold unrealistically cheaper, and that destroyed the national industry. Do you see where this is going? Okay, so again, the core problem of politics, and it's not a right-wing or a left-wing thing. A lot of you guys watching this may be of the right-wing leaning side of politics. I myself may be a little bit on that side as well. I describe myself more of a center-right libertarian, so as to put it some way. But I don't have a problem with someone that is honest and claims to be left-wing. I don't have a problem with someone that is honest and claims to be right-wing or center. I have a problem with someone that is corrupt. That's the lesson I learned from these two sons of bitches, because that was the thing in common. Right wing, left wing, the thing in common, these were extremely rich, extremely corrupt. Those two things I know will ruin a country for you. You can be socialist and be freaking Norway, and you're not going to be living in a shack like this in Norway or Sweden. And even though they have more of a social type of political views of things, and yeah, sometimes maybe a little bit more pro-capital in the old school type of way, which I like better, not the version of today of capitalism, which is just a mixture of whatever fits the agenda best so as to make the elite as rich as possible, using many times very socialistic ways of taking people's money. But going back to the topic here, guys, I think these are very important, valuable lessons that we can learn from what's happened in Venezuela. And you have, this woman here buying 2 loaves of bread with a stack of bills. Money is really worth. And you see, there's ham here as well. The thing is, this ham that they have is so expensive, this woman simply cannot afford it. She can afford a couple pieces of bread. Food, guys, it's such a big thing. Look at the trucks, the condition that they are in. Again, supplies, spare parts, anything that needs to be brought from abroad, inflation. And there's several degrees of this. Guys, the lesson is for everyone here. If you are anywhere, for example, now with the Brexit thing, with the pound losing almost 20% of its purchasing power, that's, it's not Venezuela, but the lesson is still there. Anything that has to be imported, anything that has to be brought from abroad, will eventually, give it a few more months, but eventually you will start to feel it little by little. And it's especially going to be affecting poor people. The lesson here is basically, that's why I think I always believe it's a good way of learning. Rather than theorizing and fantasy and such, these things are where the real valuable lessons are found. Look at this woman, how much weight she lost. Because, again, poor people in the United States are fat. Poor people in Venezuela, they cannot afford to keep themselves, fat. It's just not enough calories. Guys, just a few things to learn. And if you want to prepare for this kind of thing, and all the possible variants, but that type of socio-economic collapse, of course, keep in mind my book, The Modern Survival Manual, Surviving the Economic Collapse, which is not focusing right now, but yeah, here it is. And the link to my book is available below there. It's available in Amazon in case you want to check that out. It is specifically intended for this kind of mess, when a country goes down like that. Argentina never got to the point of Venezuela, but damn, it sure was close. And thank God people reacted in time and voted for Macri, finally, someone a little bit more serious, much more serious than what we used to have. But you know, all those lessons are invaluable, and these kind of examples are where you see people, where you see guys like this guy Carlos here, a guy that probably wants to work very hard, and maybe voted for the mess that he's now in, but nonetheless, he just cannot make it work, because you just cannot stay in your little homestead, in your little world, and just ignore all the mess that's happening around you. It will get to you. Maybe the final lesson is, again, when it gets this bad, it's much better to be this guy and have the money to get out of it. And if you have the head, the knowledge, get out of a place like this before it reaches this point. Folks, it's gonna be all for now. Remember to subscribe, please share, thumbs up is always appreciated. See you on our next video.